He was just a kid, a quiet, scrawny boy with his nose always buried in a book. His tormentors saw him as easy prey, a punching bag for their cruelty. They never imagined he had a secret. For 1 year, in the lonely quiet of his garage, he trained. He trained not for revenge, but for redemption. He trained to become the person he was always meant to be. And then, he walked into the ring. You won't believe the look on his tormentors' faces, and the unexpected way he found his true power. In the quiet, tree-lined suburbs of a small town in Massachusetts, lived a 15-year-old boy named Alex Miller. He was, to the casual observer, a walking stereotype. He was tall for his age, but painfully thin, a gangly assembly of limbs and joints that seemed to move with a perpetual awkwardness. His face, often pale and freckled, was usually hidden behind a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. He was a brilliant student, a quiet, introspective soul who found solace in the intricate worlds of his science textbooks and the boundless galaxies of his favorite sci-fi novels. He was a connoisseur of knowledge, a master of trivia, but in the brutal, hierarchical world of high school, he was a nobody. He was, in the lexicon of teenage cruelty, a nerd. His tormentors were 3 of the most popular boys in school. Their leader was a boy named Jake Sterling, the captain of the football team. He was a natural athlete, a boy with a chiseled jaw and a cruel, easy smile. He saw the world as a game in which he was always the winner, and people like Alex were simply pawns to be moved and discarded at his leisure. His favorite pastime was nerdbaiting, a ritual of verbal abuse and physical intimidation that he and his friends, Mark and Chris, would inflict on Alex in the hallways, in the cafeteria, and, most cruelly, after school, where there were no teachers to intervene. The bullying was relentless, a constant, low-grade hum of misery that followed Alex everywhere. They would shove him into lockers, trip him in the hallways, and, with a casual cruelty that was far worse than any punch, they would verbally dissect him, tearing him apart with a precision that only teenagers possess. They would call him Four Eyes, Stick, and Spaz. They would mock his love of science, his quiet demeanor, his very existence. Alex, with his fragile frame and his profound, unyielding sensitivity, was a helpless victim. He would try to disappear, to make himself invisible, to become a ghost in the halls of his own school. But they always found him. His parents, kind and well-meaning, were utterly clueless. They saw their son as a brilliant, if introverted, boy. They saw his quietness as a sign of his studious nature. They saw his bruised ego as a normal part of adolescence. They would tell him, just ignore them, Alex. They're just jealous of your intelligence. Just walk away. But walking away was an impossible act. It was a sign of weakness, a signal to his tormentors that he was a victim who would never fight back. And in their world, weakness was a death sentence. The final straw came on a cold, gray afternoon in the late fall. Alex was walking home from school, his head down, his worn-out backpack slung over his shoulder. He saw them waiting for him at the end of the street, their faces a mask of anticipation. They surrounded him, their laughter a sharp, ugly sound in the quiet afternoon. Jake, with his usual cruel bravado, shoved him against a chain-link fence. "Hey, Stick," he said, a wide, malevolent grin on his face. "Whatcha got there?" "A new book on how to be a loser." He ripped the book from Alex's hands, a worn copy of Cosmos by Carl Sagan, and threw it to the ground, stomping on it with a casual brutality. Alex's heart broke. It was his favorite book, a gift from his late grandfather, a man who had taught him to look at the stars with a sense of wonder. In that moment, something inside Alex snapped. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel rage. He felt a profound, aching despair. He felt the pain of his grandfather's memory being trampled underfoot. He felt the pain of his own helplessness. He felt a deep, unyielding fury, a fury that was not directed at them, but at himself. He was a coward. He was a victim. And he was tired of it. He was tired of being helpless. He was tired of being a loser. He was tired of being a ghost. He went home, his body trembling, his face a mask of quiet determination. He walked past his oblivious parents, his mind a single, unyielding thought: he had to change. He had to fight back. Not with his fists, not with anger, but with something else. He had to be strong. He had to be brave. He had to be a winner. But how? He was a bookworm, not a fighter. He knew nothing about fighting. He was a fragile stick figure who had never thrown a punch in his life. He felt a profound sense of helplessness, a sense of despair that was far worse than any bruise. But then, an idea, a crazy, impossible idea, sparked in his mind. He remembered seeing an old, dusty flyer on a community bulletin board for a local boxing gym. The Iron Fist Boxing Club, it had read. Where champions are born. He knew nothing about boxing. He knew nothing about fighting. But he knew about training. He knew about discipline. He knew about hard work. He had learned it from his science textbooks, from his long nights studying for tests, from his relentless pursuit of knowledge. He could apply the same principles to his body. He could turn his body into a machine, a weapon, a fortress. He could train. He could train alone. He could train in secret. He went to his garage, a dusty, forgotten space filled with old tools and forgotten boxes. He pushed everything to the side, creating a small, open space. He found a pair of old, worn-out gloves that his father had used for yard work. They were too big for his hands, but they would do. He found a piece of rope and a discarded tire, and with the ingenuity of a born scientist, he fashioned a makeshift punching bag. He went to the local hardware store and bought a heavy bag, a punching bag that was far too big and too heavy for his slender frame. He hung it from the rafters, a silent, menacing presence in the quiet of his garage. And he began to train. He trained every single day. He woke up before the sun, his alarm a silent, unyielding demand. He would run for miles, his lungs burning, his legs aching. He would do push-ups until his arms felt like they would fall off. He would do sit-ups until his stomach muscles screamed in protest. He would jump rope for hours, his body a blur of motion, his mind focused on a single, unyielding goal. And he would punch the heavy bag. He would punch it until his knuckles bled, until his arms felt like lead, until he couldn't feel his hands anymore. He didn't know anything about technique. He didn't know anything about form. He just hit it. He hit it with all the anger, all the frustration, all the pain of the past year. He hit it for his grandfather. He hit it for his dignity. He hit it for himself. He studied. He read books on boxing. He watched videos of legendary fighters. He learned about footwork, about balance, about the physics of a punch. He learned that boxing was not just about brute strength, but about strategy, about cunning, about the science of a fight. He learned that a boxer's greatest weapon was not his fist, but his mind. He learned to see the world in a new way, to see people not as friends or enemies, but as opponents to be outmaneuvered. He learned to read their movements, to anticipate their attacks, to use their own momentum against them. He was a scientist of fighting, and he was a brilliant one. He changed. He became a different person. His thin, gangly frame was now a lean, powerful machine. His shoulders were broader, his arms were more muscular, his legs were like steel pistons. His face, once pale and freckled, was now a mask of quiet determination. His eyes, once hidden behind thick glasses, now held a fierce, unyielding light. He was no longer a victim. He was a fighter. He was no longer a nerd. He was a champion in the making. He was no longer a ghost. He was a presence. His parents, still clueless, saw the change in him. They saw his muscular frame, his quiet confidence, his fierce determination. They thought he had simply taken up a new sport, a new hobby. They thought he was going through a phase. They never once imagined the truth. They never once imagined that their son was forging himself into a weapon of quiet, unyielding power. He kept his secret, his dark, beautiful secret, to himself. He knew that this was his journey, his fight, and his redemption. He had to do this alone. He had to do this on his own terms. He had to walk this path by himself. 1 year passed. One long, grueling, solitary year. He was ready. He was ready to face them. He was ready to face his fear. He was ready to walk into the ring. He went to the local boxing club, a small, unassuming place with a sign that read, "The Iron Fist Boxing Club." He walked in, his heart pounding in his chest, his body a coiled spring of anticipation. He saw a notice on the wall. Amateur boxing tournament. Open to all ages and skill levels. The prize was a small, unassuming trophy, a small, insignificant thing. But to Alex, it was more than a trophy. It was a symbol. It was a symbol of his redemption. It was a symbol of his victory. It was a symbol of his journey. He signed up, his hand trembling slightly. He gave his name, Alex Miller, a name that had once been synonymous with loser, a name that was now synonymous with fighter. He was ready. He was ready to face his demons. He was ready to face his past. He was ready to face his tormentors. The tournament was held in the high school gymnasium. The same gymnasium where he had once been a ghost, a victim, a loser. The same gymnasium where he had once been a silent, helpless figure in the stands, watching Jake and his friends celebrate their victories. The gymnasium was filled with people, with students, with parents, with teachers. The air was thick with anticipation. The ring, a small, brightly lit square in the center of the gymnasium, was a beacon, a stage for a drama that was about to unfold. Alex walked into the gymnasium, his face a mask of quiet determination. He walked past the crowd, past the familiar faces, past the faces that had once laughed at him. He saw them. He saw Jake and his friend sitting in the front row, their faces a mask of casual arrogance. They didn't see him at first. They didn't recognize the quiet, confident young man who was walking toward the ring. They only saw a ghost, a memory of the loser they had once tormented. He walked to the corner of the ring, and he took off his robe. He stood there, a powerful, confident young man, his body a testament to his year of solitary training. He was no longer a stick figure. He was no longer a ghost. He was a boxer. He was a fighter. He was a champion in the making. Jake's eyes widened in disbelief. His face, once a mask of casual arrogance, was now a portrait of shock. He looked at the quiet, confident young man in the ring, and he saw a ghost from his past, a ghost that had come back to haunt him. He saw the boy he had once tormented, the boy he had once humiliated, the boy who was now a man, a fighter, a boxer. He saw Alex Miller, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was no longer a winner. He was a loser. And he had no one to blame but himself. The first fight was against a bigger, more experienced opponent. Alex was a blur of motion, his body a weapon, his mind a steel trap. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace, his punches a series of sharp, precise blows. He was not a brute. He was an artist. He was a scientist. He was a champion in the making. He won. He won with a quiet, unyielding confidence that was far more powerful than any punch. He won with the quiet dignity that had once been so carelessly trampled underfoot. He won for his grandfather. He won for himself. He fought his way through the tournament, his victories a quiet, unyielding symphony of skill and strength. He was an underdog, a dark horse, a quiet, unassuming fighter who was a mystery to everyone. The crowd, once indifferent, was now on its feet, cheering his name. They were cheering for a winner who had come from nowhere, a winner who had defied all the odds. They didn't know his story. They didn't know his secret. But they knew he was a winner. The final match was against a seasoned, undefeated fighter, a champion who had never lost a match in his life. The crowd was silent, a vast, hushed presence. The bell rang, and the fight began. It was a brutal, grueling, 10-round battle. Alex was a blur of motion, his body a weapon, his mind a steel trap. He took punch after punch, his body a canvas of bruises, his face a mask of quiet determination. He fought with the heart of a champion, with the quiet, unyielding fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. He fought not for revenge, but for redemption. He fought not to prove them wrong, but to prove himself right. He fought not to win, but to be worthy of the man he was becoming. The final bell rang. The crowd was on its feet, a deafening roar of sound. The referee raised Alex's hand, a symbol of his victory, a symbol of his triumph. He had won. He had won the tournament. He had won his dignity. He had won his life. He looked at the crowd, at the faces that had once laughed at him, at the faces that had once tormented him, and he saw a look of profound, unadulterated shock. He saw the face of Jake Sterling, his face a portrait of disbelief, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Jake looked at him, and he saw not a loser, but a champion. He saw not a victim, but a survivor. He saw not a ghost, but a man. Alex looked at his hands, at his bruised and battered hands, and he knew, with a chilling certainty, that he had won. But he also knew that his victory was not about beating them. It was about beating himself. It was about conquering his own fear, his own doubt, his own helplessness. It was about becoming the person he was always meant to be. He was a boxer. He was a scientist. He was a man. He had learned that true strength was not in a punch, but in a quiet, unyielding determination. He had learned that true victory was not in a trophy, but in the quiet, profound power of redemption. He had walked into the ring as a victim, and he had walked out as a champion. And in that moment, in the quiet, empty ring, he knew that he was finally, truly, free. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about how hard you can hit, but about how hard you can get hit and still keep fighting. It's a reminder that a single act of cruelty can forge a warrior, and that the greatest victories are not won in the ring, but in the quiet, solitary moments of our own lives. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of resilience. Like and subscribe for more stories that will change your perspective and remind you that sometimes, the most valuable lessons are the ones you learn in the dark.